Oh, can't secretly record anything.
All right, it is 7:06. Thank you, San Marino residents, city officials, and school board members for attending tonight's City Talk. Tonight, we have our featured speaker, Joe Walker. So he'll be presenting Alarming San Marino, Investigating the Dark Side of San Marino's History. This evening's presenter will be Joe Walker, a Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department crime analyst and true crime historian. Mr. Walker will tell the often alarming stories of obscure and lesser known crimes that have taken place in San Marino's history. Walker does guided tours for local crime scenes and interesting locations and has put on tours regarding the notorious Hillside Stranglers and his own created programs called Terrors of Temple City and Sinister San Marino. This spring, Walker will start a tour highlighting San Marino's dark side. Joe, take it away, and we
Okay.
look forward to your presentation.
Thank you for your time. Now, I am a true crime expert, but I am not an expert on PowerPoint. So just confirm that right now you see the entire screen.
We do. Thank you.
Okay, let me just make sure I get this right. Thank you for indulging me. Okay. So you have you do see the Sinister San Marino slide,
Yep,
right?
we sure see that.
Okay. So just excuse me, we're not a professional PowerPoint person. So if I occasionally page through the wrong slide, that's just, you get what you pay for, I guess. Great seeing everybody. I love your city. I grew up in LA and on the other side of the bridge over in the Highland Park area. Used to go through San Marino all the time and really have and lived in Temple City and Monrovia and just really love going. I'm in your town probably every day. And I used to always go to that Starbucks right there at San Gabriel Huntington next to B Man, and then it stopped being a Starbucks. And of course, that was the site of the where your homeless guy there. I have some information on him at the end, who was found dead behind that area recently. So when people think of San Marino, this is probably what they think of, right? Blue Boy, multi-million dollar painting, so famous. But stuff like that doesn't really. I mean, it's interesting, but it's not what interests me the most. Okay, and you have a lot of interesting spots in San Marino that people don't necessarily know about. So I'm going to talk about a few of them for the next 20 or 30 minutes, however long we have, and then maybe you guys can throw in some of your own memories. Um, Here's just a few little known facts about San Marino that you probably never knew. So, do you guys remember? And I know this isn't really audience participation. I'm sort of used to having a group, but if you guys remember this building, now I remember this building here on Mission, but I had somebody from the presentation tell me I had the wrong building. So this happens when you're a true crime historian. You can't be protective or sensitive if people correct you because it's going to happen all the time. I had a friend that used to do talk about you probably think, what kind of friends does this guy have? I had a friend that used to do tours of the Charles Manson murder sites, and he would go to like 7 or 8 of them in a period of 4 hours, and he'd always have somebody on his in his van that would correct him, and he would really get upset about it. And I'm like, no, I'm the opposite. I'm happy to be corrected because history is really fluid, and if nowadays history is often being changed or it's being questioned. That didn't really happen, and that's how mysteries develop. But I believe this is the site of the old John Birch Society. Now, not everybody really remembers what the John Birch Society was. It wasn't exactly. It was definitely conservative Republicans, and but it really wasn't. I would guess that probably a lot of Birchers would be Trump supporters now, but not necessarily because these guys thought that Reagan was too liberal. They thought that Nixon was a Chinese spy. And I used to go into this bookstore, and even though I don't agree with their politics, what I really liked about the Birchers is they would talk to anybody. I mean, you could be some hippie, with a impeach Nixon button, and they talk to you just as much as if were a super right winger. And John Birch, if you see the picture, the portrait in the back, he was actually a soldier that was killed during the Chinese Revolution, and he was honored because he was the first American that was ever killed in a communist war or by the communists. And because people were like, "Who's John Birch?" and they were actually really nice people. They really kind of survived through their bookstores, and this was very typical of what they'd have, they were all about getting the Reds, the commies, out of Hollywood and everything. Although the John Birch Society actually came after the McCarthyism and stuff. So on to political leaders. Unfortunately, I can't have I can't have a show of hands, but this is one of my favorite houses in San Marino. And this right here, this 1635 South Los Robles, this is what it looks like now. Okay. And this was the home of the son of our 31st president of the United States, Herbert Hoover. And this picture was taken when Hoover was president or right before he was elected. Now, Hoover didn't actually live here, but he was there a lot. And Hoover kind of had his allegiances between California and where he was born in Iowa. He was sort of back and forth. His library and his grave is in Iowa, I'm 99% sure. But he had a lot of roots here in California and in San Marino. And his son was a very, very well-known local guy. And we know that President Hoover was there quite a bit. Now, as a liberal FDR guy, I always sort of poo-pooed Hoover. But he really got a bad rap. And San Marino should be proud of this guy. And they should be proud of Hoover. You know, there's a high school in Glendale named after him. And it was when I first heard about Hoover High School, I thought, who would honor Herbert Hoover? Well, for a lot of good reasons. Here's his old house. What Hoover did was Hoover probably saved 10 to 20 million lives. And he did that twice. He did it after World War I when he was put in charge of the United States Food Administration, or because there was massive starvation after World War I. And he was put in charge of it. And because he was just one of these real hardworking, super smart bureaucrat type guys, but he got things done. And because there was no previous U.S. involvement in massive aid programs, and he became popular after that. He was later elected president, and you know the stock market fell when he was president. He was widely blamed for the Depression. And here's an interesting little factoid. You know, during the Depression, it actually was not called the Depression. That term was used much later. Back then, they just called it the problem of the unemployed because unemployment went to 30, 40, 50%. My grandfather was around back then, and he talked about it. There just was no work anywhere. Everybody was out of business and everything. But after Hoover lost to FDR and FDR implemented his New Deal reforms, Hoover still stayed active, but definitely was not welcomed in the Roosevelt administration. So what Hoover did is he went on a tour of Europe, and during the first part of 1938, he visited all these European countries, and it was great for him because he was sort of a non-person in America. He wasn't mobbed by people. You know, back then he didn't even have security. You know, now former presidents get lifetime Secret Service protection. That wasn't the case back then. So, you know, he could just drive home and, you know, he was like a regular guy. But when he went on a tour of Europe he had one friend with him. So just these two guys drove around, just greeted by huge crowds. It was really quite a feat for him and really made him feel like he was doing something special. But go ahead.
I'm coming home, but I have a pizza to share with you.
Okay. Are you talking to me? Can everybody hear me? Edward, can you just let me know you're there? Am I still being heard?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think somebody was unmuted and they came over here.
Joe, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You're good. You can still speak.
Okay, so basically what happened was Hoover did not want to visit Nazi Germany because Hitler was already in power. And one day he went to meet Hermann Goring, who was the head of the Luftwaffe, who was one of Hitler's top aides. He went to his hunting lodge and somehow was told, hey, come on out in the next room. I want you to meet somebody. And he took this very, very awkward picture. And he did not want to be there. If you see him, the body language is really, you know, you can see he's just kind of sitting there stiff. He did not want to be photographed shaking hands with Hitler. And Hitler really wanted to make something big of it because there was a portion of the American public that was pro-Hitler and liked that he had his and they liked his anti-Semitic views, and Hoover was not like that at all. So this really pissed off. This made a lot of Americans really angry. And once the war broke out, he definitely was a non-person. But after FDR died, harried President Truman always thought that Hoover had gotten a raw deal. And he actually called Hoover back to the White House. This was his first visit in 20 years. And he put him in charge of the exact same program that he had used in Europe, and helped with the Marshall Plan, which was when we reconstructed all these devastated countries. So Hoover sort of had a rebirth, and his reputation went up a lot, and he deserved it. Hoover ended up dying and passed away in 1964. He did not attend JFK's inauguration because his hearing was so bad. And of course, they didn't have technology. And he was sort of embarrassed that he was an old man, but he was actually pretty clear-headed until the very end. A good man, a very good man. So this house, Stay with Politics at 1725 Euclid, was the home of the notorious Watergate figure, Donald Segretti. Now, somebody told me Donald Segretti was one of the guys in Watergate who would, he would do the stuff where they'd, sabotage phone lines, make crank calls, do stuff like that. And it was somebody at the presentation that I did a couple months ago for you. He came up and told me later that Segretti was a guest speaker at San Marino High School, and when Watergate was over, just like, hey, look, one of our boys does well. Well, what he did well was commit political tricks and got indicted and served time in jail. And I actually found, and this is a little bio on Donald Segretti, and I believe I think he's still alive. He'd be in his 80s, and I actually found him in the U.S. Census. You can see him right there, that he lived at right there on Euclid. So Ancestry.com is great for this kind of stuff. So let's see. Oh yeah. Who knows this house on, darn, I hid this. Okay. You guys remember the story about, well, again, I don't have the feedback. Everybody's on mute. This is the home of Katrina Leung, and I have her address. Where is it? Sorry about that. It was on my other slide. Anyways, that's it. Somebody will know this, because when I showed it, two people from the audience knew exactly. Katrina Leung was a Chinese spy. She was one of what they call like a sleeper cell, and she had infiltrated the American business and had seduced an FBI agent. And he would go to her house in San Marino, this house right here, and they'd have their romantic tryst. And then he would leave all his secret stuff in the other room, and she would go and photograph and scan. Well, they didn't have scanners, but photograph everything. And she ended up going to prison, and he ended up losing his job. I think he's dead now, but I think she's alive. I don't even think she served jail time. It was a very different time. This happened around, let's see, it happened around 2002, I believe. And they didn't treat spies as nearly as seriously as they do now. But what she did was she was able to steal a lot of top secret stuff. And then it turns out that she had seduced another FBI agent and stole stuff from him too. And the two of them found out about each other, and they weren't, it was sort of like a love triangle. And yeah, she was arrested in 2003. I had the address, but somebody else. Robles, there you go. I knew somebody had it. We got a couple famous athletes on a lighter note in San Marino. And who remembers who lived here? Well, of course, we're all muted. Yep, very famous jockey, held the record for most victories. Good old Willie Shoemaker. He had the most victories. He had 8,833. And he was succeeded by Lafitte Pincay, who I know and who actually lives right near San Marino and is doing quite well, and he's thriving. He looks exactly the same as he did when he was racing. So, Shoemaker was involved in a solo drunk driving crash in 1991, and he had a 0.13 blood alcohol. For a guy that only weighs 120 pounds, 0.13 will make him extremely intoxicated. He was seriously injured, was paralyzed, but he ended up suing the California Department of Transportation because they didn't have guardrails on this mountain road, and got over $1 million. So and he sued because his Ford Bronco was famous for its high rollover risk. So he died paralyzed but he died. Well, he would have died rich anyways. So here's another famous house on Lorraine Road. This is the home of Merlin Olsen. Those of us that remember the old Rams and the new Rams too, he was a very famous football player. And I guess people in San Marino back then knew him and were very proud of him. And yeah, he died in 2010. So we'll talk about some creative people you've had here in town. And if you guys remember Charles Nichols, he was an illustrator that worked with Ward Kimball, and he did this cartoon Toot Whistle Plunk and Bloom, won the Academy Award for Best Short Subject. And I actually pulled it up on YouTube and watched it, and it was actually really good. And I'm not really into watching cartoons or animation, but I really enjoyed this. Ward Kimball, if you look on the little poster board, Ward Kimball was probably a little more famous than Charles Nichols, although they both were super talented. And they were part of the Walt Disney group. Walt Disney had an inner group of a couple dozen super sharp animators, and both of these guys were in that group. Ward Kimball is actually had a big mansion, a big piece of property right in the Temple City, Arcadia County area. And back in the 90s, a couple of airplanes collided over his property, and the wreckage from the property came down onto his home. And he was actually there at the time. And I think Edward mentioned that I do other crime presentations. That incident is actually in my Terrors of Temple City presentation. So see, we're having like crossover between my presentations. Kind of cool, at least to me. And here's a little bit more information. You can Google him, but this is Mr. Nichols right here, and he was very, very talented. I guess he died. I don't have it, but he died a few years back. So, okay. Here's the plane crash where they crashed into Kimball's home, and I think Nichols would have been alive then, but Kimball was home at the time. And if you guys remember Howard Kazajian, he was the director of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he lived right here at 1630 Chelsea, which I was very excited. 1630 Howard Kazajian, this guy is huge. I was expecting to really find a real typical beautiful San Marino mansion, and when I went to 1613 Chelsea, I realized it was a mailbox rental place.
Joe, did we lose you?
Recording. Oh, you're re-recording it. So as you can see, that picture on the left is of Google Maps. The other picture I actually took, and when I was preparing my presentation, I went, this is the home of the founder of SpongeBob SquarePants, Mr. Steven Hillenburg, who just died a few years ago. I guess he got some sort of rare cancer. And I don't know if anybody in Temple City knew what a contribution this guy had, but SpongeBob, he really, really turned around how animation's influence on the American viewing public, which has changed so much over the last few years. I mean, people don't go to movies anymore. I heard a statistic the other day that almost something like 80% of American public did not see any of the Academy Award nominees last year. And the average American only went to 2 movies in 2024, which is amazing because 20 years earlier, the average American would go to 15 to 20 movies. Everything is streaming now. And SpongeBob was sort of when things started switching, because I don't even know if he ever did any theater stuff. With him, everything was cable. So the presentation is Sinister San Marino, and so far I've talked about very little that's actually sinister, but now I'll talk about a couple things that are. So all of us that are older than a certain age will remember these guys, the Flying Monkeys from Wizard of Oz. And I read something a few years back that something like 30 to 40% of children over a certain age, or when people were a certain age, this was a recurring nightmare, was these scary little creatures from Wizard of Oz. Now, they're really they're not that terrifying now. But if you remember in the old days, and you probably don't, now you'll know, Wizard of Oz used to only be shown once a year. It was shown on TV once a year from, let's say, 1955 to 1985. And it was always shown around Christmas. It'd be shown once or twice. So when you'd see it, everybody would go home and make sure they saw it. And this was always the impression they had. So it wasn't like now where you can just watch something over and over. Um, when you think when you think about fear, most people think about terrorists. Okay, they think about getting kidnapped. Okay, me, well, I don't worry about it because and this works better when you can see me. But I'm a little I'm more of a big guy. Seeing fat people are hard to kidnap. But anyways, what's scary in San Marino? Well, to me, this is the scariest place in San Marino. Is trying to get in and out of this darn parking lot, and it is even worse now with the Trader Joe's there. Before, when it was housed, it wasn't nearly as bad. And if you remember this Starbucks here, there was our homeless friend that was always right there. I'm not sure if you can see the cursor, and I'm going to talk about him a little bit later. Here he is right here. I have his name down. I'll find it for you. But he was here for years, and he had a tent behind the wall there. And then what they did is the property owners built that huge fence to keep him out. And so what did he do? And I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I can even point with my PowerPoint. But if you look in the corner, he just built his tent right outside of it. So that's what people, and I used to see people. A lot of people in San Marino took care of him. And I used to see people leave food for him. He was kind of nonverbal. I was around him many times. I never really saw him talk, but he was never threatening. He was never scary, but he lived on the streets. And he died last year. And a friend of mine is a coroner investigator. It was not a police case. It was natural causes. A friend of mine works for the coroner's office, and they have been trying to identify his family members since they found his body. And they have had no luck at all. So probably what's going to happen, this 1 year has already passed, when 5 years have passed, he will be buried in a mass cremation at the LA crematory, and his ashes will be scattered in what's used to be kind of like the pauper's grave, unless somebody steps up and buys him a cremation urn or something like that. So when we talk about things we're afraid of, and again, it's hard to use humor in a PowerPoint, so I'm going to kind of struggle through this. But what scares people? Okay, well, for me, what scares people are these guys, the Rose Parade people. And when I did this in the full audience, the place was laughing their head off. But unfortunately, you're all muted. I'm going to talk about this guy, Richard Munich, who had one of these cars. Richard Munich, and I had, again, several people say, oh, yeah, I remember him. He was a volunteer in all sorts of political stuff in San Marino, just one of these guys that joined everything. And unfortunately, he met this lady, and she was another one of the volunteers that makes San Marino so special. Donna Lee Kelly. Munich was married. She was not. They struck up a relationship, and one day on March 24th of 2004, she disappeared, and nobody ever saw her again. They pulled Munich in. He's like, I don't know anything. I don't know. I haven't seen her. There's no relationship there. She wanted a relationship with me. I wasn't interested. I'm a happily married man. Well, they heard that before, but they had no body. They didn't know what to do. So this is where he lived on Roxbury. He was more of a blue collar laborer type. At least that's what news reports. If somebody wanted to correct me, I'm happy to be corrected. But so he did not have one of the nicer houses in town. Her daughter, she had an adult daughter, came to the house, searched for her, didn't know what to do, got the keys to her car, and decided to go on a little hike. And she drove her mom's car up to Eaton Canyon. Of course, now this area is completely burnt out. I was up in Altadena a couple weeks ago for work, and it's devastating what's happened up there. The whole community, not 2/3, a lot of the homes are just gone. Anyways, her daughter went to the Eaton Canyon to go hiking. And when she pulled in there, she's like, what is that strange smell? It's so weird. What is this? And so she called the sheriffs. So the sheriffs cover that area because that's Altadena. And they popped the trunk open and found her mom in the trunk. She had been there for probably since the day she disappeared. Her decomposing body was there. So they immediately arrested Munich for her murder. And he was shocked. Everybody in San Marino was outraged. Oh my goodness, this fine pillar of society. How could this happen? And something happened because literally the next day, look, February 8th, February 11th, the DA said, never mind. We're not going to charge anybody. And sorry, I didn't point this out. Her body was found in 2004, but he wasn't charged until 2012. So basically all that time went because they just didn't have enough. And of course, his wife was pretty stressed out. His health declined tremendously during this time. And about a few months after this, and of course, I don't have my notes in front of me. A few months after this, Muniki's health got worse and worse and worse. And he ended up having a heart attack, they did heart surgery on him to fix it, and he ended up dying on the operating table. And I believe a few months after the DA's office decided not to charge him. So the stress of knowing they're going to knock on my door any second to arrest me probably is what killed him. And that's actually a fairly typical law enforcement technique. The feds are famous for this. What they'll do is they'll question somebody about some small crime, and the person won't hear from the feds for years because, let's say it's a spying thing or it's something they know they're not going to repeat. Part of the punishment is making them waiting for that knock on the door. In this case, Muniki waited 8 years for them to say something to him. So it's kind of a tricky thing. So if any of you ever get investigated by the feds and they interview you on January 1st and you don't hear anything for 5 years, that's part of why. Kathleen August, this house right here on 2680 Monterey Road. One day somebody came in the house and stabbed her, and some kids in the neighborhood saw the suspect flee. They arrested him, and he said, "Well, her husband paid me to do it." It's like, "Oh, come on! The husband didn't pay you to do it." Yes. The husband paid me to do it. Typical story. But then it's like, this was a guy from LA. Why would he kill this woman? And so they brought him into San Marino Police Department. I don't know if our chief is on. If your chief is online, I think he sometimes does come. Find the little station there, and I've been there several times for meetings through work. And the detectives were interviewing him, and so in the sheriff's department, when you interview a suspect, you have a room. It's like, let's say, the size. It's pretty small. I mean, really can't fit more than 5 people. And interview rooms, interrogation rooms are designed like that. I've never personally seen an interview room like what you see on TV, where you have a long table, mirrors on both sides. The ones I've seen are much smaller. They do have cameras in it, but you really couldn't fit more than 4 people. So I'm expecting that they were in that room. What they didn't do is they didn't search him before they put him in there, which they probably, it was a different time. And I don't think he really was a suspect in it. So what happened was he pulled out a knife. They got into a fight in the interview room, and the detective who was interviewing him shot and killed him in the interview room. Now, I've known of cases where we had a case in Temple Station years ago where a guy came in to do some business in the front lobby, and then ran out to his car because he had a gun on him. And he was like, "Well, I can't walk in the station with a gun." Well, he actually wasn't going to be searched because he just had some administrative stuff to do. But he ran out. One of the deputies behind the counter chased after him. It's like, "Well, what's going on? Why is this guy acting so suspicious?" The suspect pulled a gun out, and the deputy killed the suspect in the station parking lot of Temple Sheriff Station. If that suspect had just, or if the guy that got killed had just acted cool or left the gun in the car, nothing would have happened. In this case, the suspect was killed. If he had just left his gun in the car or left his weapons in the car, he probably could have talked his way out of it or maybe gotten charged. But it's all how you just never know. You just never know what can happen. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this house at 2160 Sherwood. Now, I met the owner of 2160 Sherwood, came up to me at the last, when I gave this presentation and said, "Yeah, I live in that house." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." Because this house was the home of the infamous Merida arson fire, where let's see, I think Leonard Merida, he was 46, worked for the DWP. He started planning this early. What he did is he covered up, this block of Sherwood, the addresses are imprinted on the street signs. It's really classy, very nice look. Well, he went out there and covered that up, and he covered up the addresses that are on the curb also. Well, why did he do that? He did it because he was going to set a fire and kill his family, and he wanted the fire department not to be able to find the address. Now, if you think about how dumb that is, I mean, of course they're gonna know what house is on fire, but he thought, and somebody figured it out and heard that this is what he did, and I went out there and saw it, and unfortunately, 5 people were killed, and then there were 3 children, his children, his wife, and then they had a cousin with them, and I believe they even had their housekeeper was there, and she died too. At the presentation I did for you guys, the current residents of this place came up to say hello. So when I do these presentations, there's always the possibility that a person who lives there may not be so happy that you put their address out on a PowerPoint slide. Well, I could always take it off if they ask. And actually, I've never had anybody ask. In this case, I asked the guy, "Oh, okay, well," and he told me he had actually bought the house knowing exactly what had happened because the house was just a charred remains of a former house. And this house that we're seeing here is the new house that was at the same lot. So, that makes sense. And nice guy. And if we ever do our tours and San Marino PD doesn't chase us out of town, maybe he'll wave and offer us a lemonade from the front lawn. So who remembers, actually somebody told me that 1401 Old Mill Road is for sale now. Okay, I'm not sure if that's, there's no reason I wouldn't doubt it. This is a beautiful property here. Again, I took this picture here. This is the Google Maps. It's right at the corner of Chelsea and another street. And back in I think 1990 or so, this was a big home owned by a Venezuelan family. Sorry for slipping around. Yeah, a Venezuelan family, and they had several kids. Well, something about this place just stood out to the community, especially to your fine educators at San Marino High School, because they just felt that something wasn't quite right about these kids. Well, it turns out that this was the home of Jorge Roca Suarez, also known as Techo de Paya, a Bolivian drug trafficker. And he's as big as any drug traffickers you could ever hope for. El Chapo and all those guys, he's just as much as that. Before he became a drug trafficker, he ran a used car business in LA. So he came from humble beginnings, but his kids used to miss school a lot. So what happened was somebody from the attendance office at San Marino High School, and I would love to have some retired classified employee from San Marino Unified contact me and tell me, yeah, this is what it was like. They were so suspicious that these kids were not actually residents that they actually did a few drive-bys on the house, did attendance checks, which is something that was very, very common for high-performing schools back in the 90s. It's not as big of a deal now since the way they recalibrated how ADA is paid out. But back then they checked, and the kids actually did live there. Now, did Suarez get nervous because of that? Is this why the DEA kicked in the doors and served search warrants and found drugs and money and guns, and that Suarez got sentenced to prison? Was it because of intel that the DEA gave him, or was it because of the fine attendance office clerks at San Marino High School? Now, we'll never quite know. But all of this stuff you can Google. I'm going to try. How much time we have here, sir?
We have about another 10 minutes or so.
Okay. So I'm sorry for skipping through a couple of things here. I'm going to talk about how many of you. Well, we can't raise hands. Woody and Eddie's was right where B-Man and where the Starbucks was. I believe there's a music place there. I think there's a martial arts place there. In that, it's that big building across from where Trader Joe's is now, in that big parking lot. So Woody and Eddie's was a coffee shop, was like a steakhouse, and I found this matchbook on eBay of all places. And I remember I think I was there maybe one time. It was pretty classy. Now, if you remember, even though probably people in San Marino felt that Woody and Eddie's was part of them, it actually was right on the border. It's because the border is the middle of the street. So that was actually an unincorporated LA County. And so San Marino PD would not respond to calls there. That would be something that would be handled by the sheriffs. So one night in 1957, two career criminals who had served time in prison together went into Woody and Eddie's and robbed it. And one of the bartenders, they didn't have 911 back then, but one of the bartenders called the sheriffs. They raced over with a patrol car with two deputies, and they went storming in there and shooting, and a big gunfight broke out. And this guy, Deputy Stephen Harold Blevins, was murdered there at 3700 Huntington Drive in San Marino. Blevins was the first deputy ever killed in Temple Sheriff Station, and he was for many years he held that record until David March was killed right here off of Live Oak in 2002 or 2003. So Temple Station has actually been pretty lucky about having line of duty deaths, and it's something historians like me do a lot of research. And we actually had a ceremony here at the former Woody and Eddie's when it was Starbucks on the 50th anniversary, 60th anniversary in 2017. And your chief was there, even though it was right outside of San Marino's border. There are quite a few San Marino officers there. And we located his family for this ceremony. And it turns out that his wife had just died a few years earlier, but she had received a pension from the state of California and from county of LA, will be the county, from the date of his death in 1957 to something like 2015. I mean, it was amazing. I couldn't believe it. So what it shows is they remember. This was actually the ceremony right here. That's the family right there. They had a rough life. That's his granddaughter, and that's his mother and sister, I think. I don't believe that. Yeah, his wife was not there. And yeah, it was a real tough time. Again, you remember this guy here, Felix. His name was Felix Confessor. He died there. Here's a copy of his death certificate. He was born in 1958, and he died in. Let's see. Sorry, I'm not better prepared, guys. Let's see. I can't see the date on here. He died. Yeah, he died in 2024. It was natural causes. They are looking hard to try to find if they can locate any family. One of my person I've worked with for years asked me to help, and I am helping to try to find anything. So we're going to leave it at that. Maybe in a couple of years, I can come back to you guys and have more information on Felix. And if there's any questions or any memories and any corrections, I'm very open. I like being corrected because what it does is it shows me that you guys were listening. So any questions?
Yes, for anybody who has questions, feel free to ask the question. Just unmute yourselves, or if you want to write it in the chat, I can ask it on your behalf. So the floor is open for questions and answers.
Hi, this is Virginia Randall. Can you hear me?
Yes, Virginia, we can hear you.
I just wanted to let you know that Felix went by his middle name, which is Diego.
That's right. Thank you. I remember that. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. It was a very interesting presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Any other questions we may have or corrections?
Oh, I already got a correction.
Susan, do you have a question?
Sorry, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
I'm trying to get my video on. Interestingly, I lived 1 block away from the 2160 Sherwood incident, and it occurred on Memorial Day morning. And I remember running over to the scene right after I heard the explosion. It was extremely loud. And I saw the man who had perpetrated the death upon his entire family, dressed in his pajamas with his clothes over his pajamas. I'll never forget that searing image. And I remember asking the police chief if he was going to be arrested. And I was told no, he's going to die based on his burns, so we'll let his insurance cover it.
Interesting.
Scary experience.
Okay, so wait, so he had his clothes over his pajamas.
I think I'm sorry, the other way around.
Okay.
Pajamas over his clothes. My apologies. He was obviously planning on moving away from the area once it ignited, but unfortunately for him, it ignited prematurely.
Yeah, and I guess I believe that it took several days for him to die, which
Yes.
Yeah, which makes it even worse because who can imagine a death worse than burning to death and then being on life support? And who knows if, I mean, I doubt if they were very liberal with painkillers either because he just murdered his family.
He looked really bad that morning. As I said, that sort of seared in my image.
Oh, that's crazy.
So Joe, we have a question at the moment, and it's regarding if you have any updates or know about the recent stabbing of the endocrinologist.
Which one was that?
Nicole is the one that asked the question. Nicole, if you can elaborate, that'd be awesome.
Where did it happen?
Couldn't tell you. I'm just going by what they put on the chat at the moment. It was a pre-fire stabbing of the endocrinologist here in San Marino. I believe it was about 6 months ago.
Was it a?
Oh yeah, no, actually early January, right? The day before the Altadena fire. That must be an ongoing investigation still.
Wasn't it a personal dispute with somebody? I don't think it was like a stranger type of thing. The wife was stabbed. Okay, no, I don't. Yeah, okay. Oh, now you see, you definitely got me interested. You know, it's hard. It's getting harder and harder to get information on current cases than it used to be. Can you hear me? You can hear me, right? Okay, you're muted.
I can hear you. I can definitely hear. I was muted.
You know, it's getting really hard now because local papers are just a shell of what they used to be. You know, I mean, the LA Times really was the last time you even saw San Marino in the news. You know, I guess you guys do have a weekly paper, and I think you actually have reporters that work there. You're very lucky because most cities have no local media. There was a murder yesterday in Arcadia where somebody in a very upscale neighborhood of Arcadia where the family arrived home and somebody stabbed the father or shot the father, and the father shot back. So I'm not sure how that all happened. He was 61 years old and he was with his son. The suspect grabbed his son and they got into an altercation, and the father was killed, but the father shot at the suspect too. We're not sure if he was hit, but we're thinking, how did these people know each other? So my guess is there's gonna be a lot more coming out, and they probably all know each other, and who knows what it was. It was probably some sort of there was some sort of a dispute, you know. So you can see me fine, right? Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. I guess in your next presentation, you might have an update on that then.
Just let me know in advance, you know.
Sure.
But it's really hard, you know. It's really hard, you know. And we don't even have the hangouts anymore. You know, in the old days, you'd hang out the donut store, the local pub, the local whatever, and you share information, or the Kiwanis meeting, the PTA. But now everybody's on their phones, and of course, these next door apps are so full of paranoia and craziness that you can never really get a straight answer anywhere. So it's information, a lot of bad information out there. So I'm getting political, so I'll avoid that.
All right. Anybody else have any further questions? Any additional questions? Anything you'd like to add?
Well, see, if we were all in person right now, we would be all hanging out, you know, smoozing, you know, grabbing a cup of coffee. But here we're all just sitting in our stale environments, you know, hiding from the world, you know.
Well, we'll try to make it as much as interactive as possible. Crystal just came online. Linda did. So I'm sure they have a question somewhere.
Well, if I was doing a presentation on what I do when I do the terrors of Temple City, I actually make people talk about the first person they ever knew murdered. So, and that boy, talk about getting a group talking. How about this? We have another 5 minutes, or for another 3 minutes. Does anybody in the room? How many do we have there, Edward?
Right now we have over 30, and somebody just put a note here on the chat regarding the endocrinologist that was on Lorraine. She says a husband stabbed his wife and set the house on fire. He left to pick up his sons from the baseball practice and returned as the fire department arrived.
Oh wow. Okay. You know what? Again, what a shame, because her information, she probably read it somewhere or it was told to her. But I mean, and if you just don't, yeah, I mean, information is not as it's not as readily available as it used to be. If this happened 30 years ago,
no, this happened just recently in Altadena, or excuse me, in January.
Yeah, actually, was it? Yeah, I think I did hear about it. You know, but again, think of what that father was going through when he goes to pick up his kids, and he's thinking about what he's going to drive back to, and he knows that he stabbed the wife or the mistress, or right? He said he stabbed his wife, but you know, it's just amazing how, and those poor kids, terrible. There was actually a similar case to that in Arcadia about 10 years ago, where a relative killed two boys in a condo on Doherty Road, and then went on a trip right afterwards, and went to Hong Kong, you know, directly from the murder scene. And the family came home, and they didn't know the two boys. They wondered why they were sleeping late, because they're typical Arcadia high school students who never miss school. And it was 8 o'clock, and the kids aren't up, and they went in, and both kids have been murdered by their uncle. And unfortunately, Hong Kong has really good extradition, and sent the killer back like the next day, and he's now in prison for life. That was a big case, and it's actually on my Arcadia tour, which I'll be doing soon. So, does anybody have any other questions or comments? I could just ramble on about true crime. So just to confirm, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, was never in San Marino. He could have passed through, but he did not commit any crimes. Most San Gabriel Valley cities will always say, oh yeah, this happens a lot on social media. Oh yeah, we saw Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He tried to kidnap me he used to come into my store. He came into my barbershop. No, he was, there's no known sightings of him in San Marino, although he did commit 2 murders in Arcadia, 2 in Sierra Madre, but not in San Marino. So he was probably afraid. He was afraid of your terrifying police up there. You know. Yes, I heard somebody talking.
Yeah, Go ahead, Linda.
There was a question on the chat. How do we find out about the tours?
You know what? Just go to sinistersanmarino.com. Let's see if I can find it on my. I haven't really started. So I'm retiring from the sheriff's department right now, and I can't really do anything. I have to wait until my workers' comp doctors clear me. So they said nope, no tours. So it'll be sometime later this year. And you know what? I'll make sure I let you guys know. Hopefully, Edward will let me use your resource to publicize it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll let you know, and maybe we'll even give away a couple of free tickets or whatever. So, and you know, right now, you know, people are anxious to do things. You know, how often are you able to socialize with your friends and neighbors? It just isn't like it. I mean, unless you have kids in the schools, you know, unless you're going to football games, or I don't know all your sports, but let's say you're going to a swim meet or a soccer game. Most of the time, we don't really interact with our community members. It's the same. I've lived in Temple City, Monrovia. Unless you have kids in the schools, you really don't have many opportunities to really talk to people. So I find there's a real eagerness to do tours and do community events. And I know San Marino has several, but you know, in the old days there was something every week to do. You know, so and that's how you had, you know, Rotary, Kiwanis, the Women's Club, all those, you know, everything. So. Anyways, enough of my soapbox. Any final questions before we call it a day? And
yeah, just any final questions? As Joe says, we can wrap it up. Just to be obviously within time limits, respectful of everybody's time here, and thank you for attending. For the residents and school board and city officials, our next one is on April, and it's the second Tuesday in April. So we'll see you back then. If there's no other further questions, we can wrap it up.
Thank you, everybody. I love talking about crime, and stay tuned. I did my alarming Alhambra tour, Marino tour. The Alhambra people heard about me, and I had over 150 people at that presentation. It was really a great. It was. I was just amazed. They actually sold out because they advertise their events on Eventbrite, and when they got to 150, they stopped accepting new people. Now, people, because the Alhambra Historical Society had never had that many. They've never had half as many